Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 13th of January 2019. I hope that everyone's recovering from their crazy commercialized Christmas period and they call it happy holidays. It means nothing. What does happy holidays mean? Happy holidays. I mean, holidays themselves comes from the word holy days. And for most folk in the West now, that's kind of taboo. And they've been trained as taboo because you can't have holy days. And so they haven't found another term for it, really. It's rather sad that it's so commercialized. But the whole system now is commerce, isn't it? It's like the movie Network, where the rants, awfully good rants go on about that particular movie, where they talk about the commercialized system and how corporations run the world and rule everything, and there are no nations anymore. It's all international corporations. And that's an old movie, of course, that dealt with a lot of the truth. And we certainly are living in it today. And it takes participation of the public to be deceived in the system that they're taught to believe in. That's the key. You're taught to believe in it. And you're taught to vote for it too. But you must participate in the cons that go on when you're told that they're creating a utopia for you and everything's going to be just wonderful. Sit back and relax, and the future. Back in the 70s, I think it's 70s, maybe even earlier, they keep recycling the same articles over and over again in newspapers and in academia, where they had big newspaper articles of the coming future, of utopia, where it'd be a privilege to get a job to serve the public, because with automation and so on, most folk wouldn't need a job, and somehow money would be, again, the Bertrand Russell thing, disappear in your bank account from the state. That they didn't mention about how much control that would give the state over you, which is where we're going, of course, because money is an awfully powerful thing for controlling everybody, especially if you need it to pay off debts or your rent or anything else. So Russell said they can use it eventually to punish you if you don't go along with whatever social agenda is being pushed. But it's so true, isn't it? And in the 70s, they said, we'd all be wearing, I don't know how they're going to manage this part, but like Roman togas. They'd always artists' renditions of people in Britain wearing togas and just floating along the countryside, as if they're on air or something. This is the rubbish. No doubt our tax money funded all this rubbish. It always does. But this is what they gave us for the future. And how really you'd be bored stiff. And the most important thing would be simply recreation to pass your time. That would be the big thing. But you'd have no worries at all. Everything would be taken care of for you. And you just wear your togas. And I guess maybe they're going to maybe artificially create a different environment for you so you didn't freeze to death like I would be here, for instance. Since last night, the temperature hit about minus 32. But minus 30 actually, centigrade, around minus 22 Fahrenheit, around that temperature. And that's pretty typical at nights here now. Has been since about October, as winters get longer and longer. But anyway, I certainly won't be wearing a Roman toga outside. You'd have to chip it off me if I came inside, and probably chip my muscles too, to get them moving again. But the thing is, we live in such farce and fantasy, and we used to call it hogwash. Hogwash is an awfully good term for most of the stuff that's dished out to today by your socialist type system. Now, I gave talks years and years ago about the system, many times, of how it changes using facts, not just my opinion on things, but facts, and how you're trained to believe in a system, which is the country generally you live in, or the area you live in. And they tried it even with the European Union. It didn't work too well because folk can't really identify with this mishmash of different cultures. The cultures are different and independent as they should be, but you can't imagine them all being one particular people as they're trying to make it out to be. It just doesn't wash. And no one can manage a system better than the folk living in the area they're actually living in. Some remote organization or parliament or government cannot ever possibly, any more than ancient Rome could, govern a place far, far away better than the people living on it, because every area has different problems, different geography, climate, and everything else. So utopias tend not to work, even when they ram it down your throats. And you can tell always when they're on a roll in a socialist, because all governmental systems become socialist. The bankers at the top, the big money boys that planned the world order, the Alfred Milner Group, for instance, Lord Alfred Milner, and his whole group basically ran what was called the British Empire in the 1800s and expanded it too into the early 1900s, using it, they said, as a form of governmental control over the planet. And the US was to take it over and merge with them. And that's what they've been doing since really World War I, I suppose, really. Because Britain by World War I was bankrupt many times over. And World War II simply put the cap on it much quicker. But the reality is that the US was to take it over. And don't ever get lost in this idea of countries dominating. There's a system on the planet here that will hop from country to country, whichever one suits them better at the moment. And they've done it so many times. Whichever one suits them best at the moment, they'll base it there. And remember, you don't even need a place anymore. London has always been one of the biggest places for international finance. Always. The US, of course, took that over, with New York being the empire state, of course. They call it the empire, and people don't even ask what empire they're talking about. But it's, you know what empire it is, it's rather obvious. And finances and basing the World Bank there too, and all the other banks that are involved with the World Bank based inside the US to dish out loans across the planet. And they use the US Federal Reserve today as really a big bank, basically, lending out across the whole planet now. And just like the British taxpayers were put down as a guarantors to pay off debts of all kinds, the bankers in the US do the same kind of thing, including the loans to different countries across the planet. So there's an elite group way above what we think of as nations. There's an elite group above what you think of as even patriotic citizens. Now remember that Carroll Quigley said that when he was talking about this group that had existed so long, that he worked for, in fact, a secretive group that governed countries and selected presidents and prime ministers for over 60 years. That was the 1960s, so you're looking at the late 1800s, the latter part. He's talking about that all leaders and all parties were members of this one organization. And he said we're often mistaken for the communists because really the mission had a lot of socialistic implications, very similar to communism. And it's communism or socialism that the big boys really like, the socialist idea with governments that are elected, mind you, to keep the scam going, because the bankers love socialism. In socialism, everything becomes beginning with... Here's the thing, let's get down to it. It's not difficult to understand, but it's a terminology, I was going to say earlier, that we're indoctrinated with, that'll stick with you. It makes it very hard for people to understand. They're looking at something, thinking it's the same, but it's actually changed. You can still salute your flag and hear the national anthems and go through the rituals that you have every so often. And yet the policies within your country could be 180 degrees in direction from where it was when they first founded your nation, or that particular part or system in your nation. And you adapt until you don't even know that you're 180 degrees from what it was all about. Most folk don't even know it's changed. But socialism couldn't take off so well in the West, especially in the US. They got around that quite simply by bringing in non-governmental organizations under charities, lots of charities. That's how he started off. And social programs that were voluntary to begin with through libraries, etc., and independent of government at the time. And then over time, the public get used to having libraries and social events put on by initially themselves, and little committees would be voluntary, and then they have collections for it and all that kind of thing. But after 2 or 3 generations, they can start asking quietly for little grants from the government to help them. Before you know it, it's run by governmental money. And then the leaders of these different programs start getting this semi-independent status as a kind of overseer or commissar over a particular little area of your culture or socialistic, whatever it happens to be. And then next thing you know, they're dictating to you with authority. And so you bring it in in a very cleverly disguised fashion, always to do good, mind you. It's always put forward as doing good to help you. And after, as I say, after a generation or two, since you've always known this particular event every year, or whatever it happens to be, once you start getting cash to it, there's no big deal. It seems kind of normal to you. And that's how you set up a socialistic system across the board in multi-layered structures, including housing and everything. They really, at one time, were kind of voluntary things with voluntary committees, etc., to keep it separate from the public purse. And the big bankers love socialism because every agency of government, even down to your local government, will go cap in hand to borrow money and get used to spending more than they can take in, spending more than they can take in. And as long as the taxpayers put down as the guarantor to pay it off through taxes, the big boys are awfully happy. In fact, they know that their compound interest structure is not meant ever to be paid off. You can't pay it off once you're into it. Remember, banks make their money off of interest. Off of interest. That's the key to it. So the more debt that is owed to a bank, the happier the bank happens to be. And that's why the big boys that run the global structure with the central banking system that they've enforced upon everybody is working so well for them. And as I say, money is it's almost a mythical thing in a sense, as far as what they say it is. When you look at what it actually is worth, your buying power dropping your entire life. You need more and more and more of these little notes or whatever, or even numbers these days, because they're worth less and less and less. And you don't even understand. Most folk will never ask who decides what it's worth, or how they even come to that conclusion of what they say it's worth. And yet they still think they're free. If total strangers that you'll never meet, and you don't even know, most folk don't even know they exist, in fact, decide what your currency is worth, you are on a tightrope your entire life without even knowing it. You don't know. But as I say, getting back to the whole multi-governmental multi-layered system, and when government even farms things out to agencies, so when you complain about the agency not doing its job right, the government will say, well, there's an agency, it's a different structure. You have to take it up with them. It's out of our hands. Whereas if they kept it within government, you could at least get to the politicians and throw tomatoes at them, as you always do, verbally or whatever, and they'd have to answer to it. But as long as it's agencies, it's easier for government to ignore you. Well, it's not our problems, you have to deal with them. That's what I'm saying. So it's just too easy to use time. Always think of that. There's a Denzel Washington movie. It was awfully good, about a demon. It was a good horror about a demon that could take over people and move from person to person just by touch. In the movie, Denzel Washington, who plays a cop, is in the police station, and this demon is now after him. And it comes, and you'll see different people passing the table in front of Washington and singing "Time Is on My Side" from the Rolling Stones. And it's a tribute to the devil, and so on. They'd sing a line, and somebody else would take it up as he passed, and the person who passed then would stop, and it would be passing on. So it just kept going back and forth, different people. And that's such a good example of how time can be used so perfectly, in a sense, to fool everybody. Just like a corporation, like I say, or even a foundation. There are foundations that run thousands of non-governmental organizations today that are still classed as tax-free charitable foundations with multi-billion dollars, some of them. And they finance big mass movements across the entire planet and think tanks and so on. They advise governments. You don't elect them, they're private. Most folk don't even know how they even are structured, never mind how they work. And yet these big, massive organizations can last 200 years or more with a set principle of heading towards this global government, whoever happens to be, or a total governmental controlled system with specialists running the whole planet for 200 years or more. You don't vote for them, and they're constantly working. And countless generations are hired by them and trained by them and get paid well and go across the world as technocrats, implement things and retire, and other guys are brought on and so on. That's how it works. That is your system. Most of us are short-term thinkers. We can't think that far ahead. It's hard enough even making sure you can actually get to the following year, financially or any other way for that matter. But big foundations can plan centuries ahead if they want to. And when you have them all working together as one big consortium, running thousands of non-governmental organizations, openly advising governments. Not the public. There's no public input here. These are private organizations advising governments and all governmental departments. But the person at the bottom that does the voting, you're taught that just vote for the person, that's it. Once you've done your vote, that's it. Sit back for 4 or 5 years without knowing what's going on. And it keeps you all quiet, you see. But socialism is the key to it all. Socialism, remember, is scientific socialism. That's what it's called in the West. In fact, so was communism supposed to be scientific socialism, where experts could be way more efficient than leaving it to politicians that represent the public, because the public could never, ever agree on anything, and they simply wouldn't vote or do things in their best interest, whereas these experts would, you see. And so you're in scientific socialism run by a form of secular humanists. And secular humanism is religion itself, as was Marxism too, of course. It's a belief system. So, as I say, the big boys love this system. Constantly get into worse and worse debt. Each time they bail you out, your currency drops like a stone in purchasing power, and then they tax you all the more for the more and more for all the other so-called money that the governments are borrowing. Now, the big lenders to the planet don't want paper given back to them in return for things. They want real goods, tangible goods, or gold, diamonds, whatever it happens to be, or real estate. But all they really issue to the governments is the right to print cash. That's what they call a loan. What a fantastic system, really, isn't it? They don't have to ship in any gold or anything into a nation like they used to at one time. They simply write out checks to give permission to whoever prints the thing up to print up the cash, and they bill your government for it. The government then has you down on the tab for paying off the interest and all, but it has to be paid off in real tangible assets, not this paper nonsense or blips in the screen. Not bad at all. And that's why when you look at certain currencies, if you go abroad and you'll see you go peso and lira and so on, and you can pay like thousands of them just for a coffee. It sounds incredible, just for a coffee. But that's normal to them, and it'll be normal to us one day too. Look at the old movies and see what gasoline cost, say about 30 years ago. And look what the houses were bought for back in the 1950s when a lot of them were built in the cities like Toronto. And the houses were often built for about $5,000. 1940s, and a person back then could afford to pay off a mortgage pretty quickly for it, and often have a family, and his wife would look after the children at the time too. One person working, paying off a mortgage, get a car and so on a small salary. Well, actually it was see, the dollar back then was worth a lot of money. You could live well, remember, in some countries with a couple of pounds a week in your pocket. You could eat well too. The currencies are constantly devalued through this thing called debt, which very few folk actually at the bottom ever understand or care about, as long as they can still spend. I've gone through the whole thing with the bailouts the last time, where the Canadian banks were awfully good at keeping it quiet in Canada, and lied initially too. Oh, we're fine. But the fact that all the top banks in Canada, all the big ones, were up to their eyes in massive debt when that crash came. And it was the Federal Reserve. It was agreed in the US that the Federal Reserve would give special drawing rights to the top banks in Canada, just like they did in the States, and the special drawing rights to help bail them out of that crisis. But it put the taxpayers in Canada down for huge interest increases in the paybacks on behalf of their government through taxation. And it's not finished yet. Because I said at the time, and no one's listens at the time, except even those that are on the streets and who lose their homes don't listen at the time. They're too worried. That's why they don't listen to news. Once a crash comes, it's out of their hands. And like Curtis said, and others have said before too, there's a sense of apathy. I gave talks about that back in the 90s, early 90s. I said that apathy is a creation of government. It's a tactic for control. And I knew that because I came from a country that had been soaked in apathy from at least, well, in my lifetime. They had price and wage freezes when I was small. They had, I think, 3 days of electricity going on for a while with the Labour government at the time too. And because there was a shortage of energy, they said, oh my goodness. It was a country that was still on rationing up into the 1950s. They've been in rationing right through World War II, 1939 onwards, into the 1950s. That was Great Britain, they called it. And again, too, you're always, they even had articles in the newspapers right through when the Beatles were going out, of tighten your belts, tighten your belts. And that was a common term used by the government as they increased taxes and everything. They put prices up, tighten your belts. And then they had prices and wage freezes, they called it. The wages were definitely frozen, the prices weren't, as far as I can see. But the fact is, that was apathy. It created apathy, and the public got used to nothing but bad news. And then during the 70s, they had tremendous unemployment as factories after factories were closing down. It was never disclosed to the public why they were closing down, or the fact they were actually getting paid to move out the country. But literally for a few years in the 70s, that's all you heard daily on the news. Daily. And I think Britain had the highest suicide rate in the whole of Europe then, and Scandinavia. At one time it was Sweden, but Britain overtook Scandinavia because of the unemployment. It was just no future. There's absolutely no future. Margaret Thatcher, when she got in, by that time she got in, she actually said that. She says, there's a whole generation growing up now who'll never see work in their lifetime. Get used to it. That was a speech. Get used to it. Well, there's great future prospects for you. Because no matter how bad things get, you still have to pay for your basic existence of food, shelter, and clothing and heat. You need that. So apathy was created. What did they do with apathy? They actually dish out, in comes the big drug cartels. And all through Scotland, and it was just incredible, the amount of heroin that was pushed in there. Very quickly too, very quickly. And I don't care what they say, that's part of the system of control. That's what it is. So apathy is a terrible thing. Now the government, when it's getting really up there into socialism, and you get pummeled with the idea that you're free, because sexual freedom now is called freedom. All freedom is sexual apparently. And you can do all kind of weird things sexually, however you would take your fancy, and now you're free. Now you're free. See, well, if you're starving, I don't care what you do sexually, you're still going to starve. So freedom is a lot more than sex. Obviously. An awful lot more than sex. And freedom is a little bit of a responsibility as well, where you cannot allow governments to have all this authority over you, or agencies or anything else for that matter, over you. And if you can't have basic protection, if you won't stand up for yourself in basic protection, for your basic rights, and I'm including civility and rights, by the way, because I've seen it personally, not too long ago here, where folk can just start screaming in your face when they have no right to do so. But they actually believe that you're now a peasant. For different reasons, they'll believe that. In some countries people come from too, they actually have tremendous systems of talking down to people, or screaming down to them. And in so-called civilized countries, in the West were supposedly civilized, you didn't talk to people like that. You had a certain modicum of civility and patience. And it's amazing how well things will function if you have that. Just amazing. But folk today are cracking up on and losing patience. Is no doubt through all different kinds of reasons, but the fact is people are now, I call it this basic abuse in a sense. Now you will have people who will always use the abuse technique for dominating someone else. You'll see it everywhere, in fact. And I remember there was a guy on radio for years and years and years who is probably still alive actually, and he used to give talks on not being abused by people. And he even gave examples of going into restaurants and so on, and you might get a particular woman occasionally coming over who right off the bat would be very brusque And a normal, decent person's attitude, when a person suddenly becomes brusque towards you, you'll back off thinking, what have I done to offend them? It's a technique that they use to control you. It's very common, actually. And how he wouldn't stand for it, even there at a restaurant, he wouldn't, and quite rightly too. And most folk will cave in, you know, and they'll say, what do you want, you know? It's like, I don't have all day. That's what they're saying, I don't have all day. And so you back off and you start cringing, you know, because normal, decent folk will do that. Well, you got to stop doing that. You got to stop doing it. Really. Because in a socialistic system, if you start caving in and walking backwards, when there's no negotiation left, which means there's no real rights or freedoms left, there's only horror to look forward to. Ask the old Soviet Union. Ask the victims of the Bolsheviks when basic, decent, civil dialogue breaks down. Ask them where it ends up. And it always starts off with the attitude, the nasty attitude. That's where it starts. You can't let it go that way, folks. Can't do it. So as I say, we live in a system that has been designed purposely. It didn't happen by itself, with all the multi-layered facets of socialism, which all the banks want. They prefer this system. A system that's not socialist wouldn't have all the borrowing rights and demands from these banks. You understand that? And having the whole planet basically getting bailouts from the World Bank and then run by the IMF that steps in like the big bailiffs do, deciding on what you're going to spend on healthcare and how much is going to go to the people who you owe money to. That's not that's really this is a prison. This is a real prison of finance, and it's meant to be so. So that a tiny small clique can live so high on the hog that you can't even imagine how they live today. Then they bring their relatives in and give them jobs and blah, blah, blah. In a socialistic system, you'd be surprised how many of the relatives end up getting jobs over where become agencies which are in fact, or were in fact, charitable institutions, but are now like agencies. It's astonishing. And always paid a lot of money. They don't believe in doing anything for the service to the people. They want big money. And big money is rather terrifying today. It really is. When I see some of the salaries these people get for nothing, really, then you really do realize that you're in the psychopathic era. Because psychopaths have no problem with accepting disgusting amounts of money to be in service, as they call it, to the public. It's such a farce. It's scary, actually. Scary. To me. And I don't think it's meant to go on forever, actually. And it won't be, because money is a joke to start with. Only the joke's on us, especially when you can't eat. Or it's constantly devalued, and your prices are going up and up and up. It is, isn't it? It's on us. And there's no input from the public at all. You're not asked for any input on anything that matters, especially to do with taxation, or even to do with the multi-layered agencies for all these growing relatives as you would take over the jobs everywhere, but being those who already rule. It's astonishing how big it is today. It really is. But nothing is ever as it seems to be. There are no self-made people like Bill Gates or the Facebook crew or anybody else. It's all planned way in advance as fronts. They're fronts, big front people. There's so many articles out even recently. They're always getting them since the day one, but even recently to do with the control of Microsoft and how their system, and I knew this years ago, even before I touched the computer, the big authority systems around the world wanted one system to be the kingpin so they can control all, obviously. And that includes CIA and everything else. And Microsoft was the one that they basically pushed, it would seem. So nothing, as I say, is just self-made by itself. It doesn't happen. And social movements don't happen by themselves. They're all planned that way. They always have the same agendas. It's astonishing to me that when you meet people who suddenly become the big philanthropists, they all are completely on board with every part of the globalist socialist agenda, the greening thing, and the gender thing and every other thing out there, they're on board with it all. Isn't that amazing? Don't you think there should be some exceptions if you had a law of averages? Doesn't that tell you something right there? A little secret to the system, if you go into the Milner Group that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, is that they were all, if you got on board with them and you were selected for the inner and outer party, and the CFR is part of this group too today, and the Royal Institute for International Affairs. It's all one group. If you were selected, you would be promoted to the top in whatever area you were selected to go into. Doors would just fly open, and you would sail to the top. Even in the military, by the way. And you'd be like a technocrat. You have lots of things you had to accomplish. But you would be so incredibly rich with servants and all the rest of it, and chauffeur-driven cars. In every country that you ended up going to and visiting, you had the life of a king in a sense. Very real. And part of it too was this what they call public service. See, to them they said, you've been a public servant for the greatest cause on the planet, for this agenda. But you lived, as I say, like a king. And if you go really up there high, like Cecil Rhodes, and he was selected too. And he wrote about being in cahoots with Lord Rothschild for this British Empire South Africa deal and Rhodesia. He left in his will. Most of the money was to go back to the Rothschilds. You must put your money back in to the same agenda for the next generation. And that's what the philanthropists do, you see. It's the same organization, if you haven't figured it out. And the philanthropies they're into are all the same ones. You couldn't have somebody with, I'll accept that and be on board with that, but not that. They're on board with them all, always, always, always. Because they must start putting money back in to the system that made them rich. You see, that's how it runs. They're not self-made at all, for those who don't quite know and haven't figured it out yet. And the same thing with the CIA, MI6, and many other special spy agencies, intelligence agencies, they like to call themselves, across the whole planet. They have lots and lots and lots of big, real corporations that really manufacture things, and etc. But they're still part of the military-industrial complex too, most of them. So nothing is quite as real as that. So as I'm saying, socialism can be forced upon the people in a way which is wonderful, isn't it? And that's what Aldous Huxley talked about too. He knew this. Well, he knew what the agenda was. And he said that people could be taught to love their servitude step by step. You bring them to a stage where they'll love their servitude. Because they're constantly told they're free. Now they can take drugs galore, you know. Lots of sex. If you get someone pregnant or someone gets pregnant, the state takes care of it. You get rid of that little wart, as they call it. And if they can treat your STDs, then also, if they can, because they can't treat them all, but they don't like to talk about that part, especially in the movies that promote it all. But most of the problems they'll deal with for you. Or if you want to have a child without having the dad live with you, or even have a dad living with you at all, you can have artificial insemination, and you'll also have the states financing you through university or something. It's a utopia for certain agendas. But each part of these agendas must destroy the tradition, and that's the whole point of it. It's warfare, you understand. And the participants that go through at the bottom level don't even recognize it as such. It's really quite fascinating. So everyone comes to love their servitude, and if you get stressed out, well, just get your cheap drugs from your government, like in Canada here, and your liquor licensing bureaus that deal with it all, and they'll dish out your drugs and go home and stare at the wall, you know. And that's freedom. That's your new freedom. And if that's too much for you, in a socialist system run by experts, and experts say, why waste money treating people for diseases when they're going to die anyway, or the older folk, why not just help train them all to start take a pill early? They've had debates out. I mentioned them years ago. Debates, not really debates actually. It's generally selected professors coming out across the world, all at about the same time, and getting airplay, right? In this free society, this happen to always get airplay at the right time together. saying the same things. Well, what's wrong with, if you get fed up living, why not just die? Or why not? In Australia, I had a guy coming out all the time, and they giving him lots of airplay, who said, well, they could leave, they could just kill themselves off rather than retire, and leave jobs for the younger people. You understand? This is what the technocrats do. They float these people out there, just with ideas to see if you can, and then check the chatter on the internet and so on, to see how you're responding to it. They're like trial balloons. And they even have different algorithms on everything, voting, you name it, blah, 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 or opinion making or opinion setting, to find out why you won't go along with something, what's your objections, and then they find ways to get around that. It's so quick and automatic, it's just astonishing. But that's the system we're living in. It's a really, it'll get to a horror show, and it will, honestly, become a horror show. So yeah, you're free, you can have sex. Any problems to do with sex that come out of sex will be dealt with by the state for you quite free of charge. It's always dumped on the whole population, mind you. Nothing is free. And STDs will be dealt with as best they can. And you just sit back and enjoy yourself, be a perpetual child with no responsibility. And it's all taken care of for you. But along with all of this comes the agenda. It just comes because you must accept more and more and more control over your lives in different areas, different fields. And then it'll come down to, and they're floating that again too, voluntary sterilization. And they're also floating, especially for men, because men are bad apparently, and today, pills for men. Chemical sterilization, really. Quite something. And because society has been corrupted intentionally, with lots and lots of pornography, even mainstream TV that are watching all the time is loaded with stuff. It's weaponized, highly weaponized. Hardly a thing I'm sure you can watch today that doesn't have all the subliminals and all the messages in it too, that you're supposed to parrot. And with the right kind of writing, with behaviourists all working on the same plays and dramas and so on, and movies, they can make you believe anything and cry at the wrong times when you shouldn't be crying at all. They can even make you feel guilty for something you've never done in the world of fiction as you're propagandized and indoctrinated. It's a perfect science. And this is what they call utopia. And there are people out there today that have been brought up with the expectations that socialism is great for them. They're younger. They're generally selected on higher salaries than the general population to be on talk shows on TV and things like that. And they think it's just wonderful. They don't know much, but they think it's all wonderful. Because to them, they can't imagine it ever being anything different than it is today, this very day. They can't imagine it. And they will be in for a big fright at the right time down the road. But to be taught and helping to teach children, just go and play, right through adulthood, just keep playing. And that's what you're supposed to do. You'll come to love your servitude. It's all here. It really is. There's never been a time with so much entertainment dished out like you wouldn't believe. But all entertainment, as I say, is weaponized. The very fact you can soak a good chunk of your life away in entertainment, and that in itself, even if it's all nice stuff to watch and good clean stuff to watch, it wasn't damaging to your health. Watching way too much of it is still a good chunk of your life. I used to look at my parents watching TV. And apart from the fact, a lot of people, it saved them from having to even converse with each other. That's a fact too. It was well understood from the beginning that would happen. But also, to watch them laugh and look sad or serious at certain bits and laugh again. I thought, this is happening across the whole country watching this thing at the same time. What a power that is, isn't it? Tremendous power. And it's not accidental. Now, you know, for instance, that I've talked so many times about the fact that the sexualization of everything is a warfare technique of control, and also to destroy family units and so on. And eventually that everything would be allowed. Pedophilia wouldn't exist as a term, because it would be allowed. And of course it's being pushed right now, pushed bit by bit. That you've had judges in different countries even ruling that if a young girl, for instance, had sex with someone much older, even though she was underage, then she was precocious and she knew what she was doing, yada, yada. There's been ones in even Latin America, well, publicized across the planet, where the verdict was that it was consensual because she knew what she was doing. How many people know what they're doing when they're 11 or 12? Or the repercussions they're going to have for their whole lives, on anything for that matter. But again, it won't exist as a wrong shortly. And full nudity and full sexual activity, I mentioned back in the 90s too, that will become standard fare. Definitely. And we've had instances of that already. So it's here pretty well. But I also knew the absurdity of the weaponization affecting people would have some amazing consequences. Well, I was looking through a paper today, and there was an article about a woman who had turned her husband into the police, or at least his laptop into the police. He's a doctor, and she'd found child pornography, a lot of it, on it. And it's apparently there's different categories up to horrific, how they grade it. I don't know how they grade it. And she turned it in to the police, and he got arrested. But the thing is, I think she said something like she was looking to play something on the computer, like Game of Thrones or something. Maybe getting mixed up with stuff, but I think that's what it was, something like that. And regardless of what it actually was, but the fact is, the only thing I remember at Game of Thrones, because someone sent me a disc once, was it was bizarre. I could see it off the cuff. I think it was a dwarfish guy having you-know-what with a woman. And then different angles of the same kind of thing with different people to get done. That was all I needed to know about it. But you understand what I'm saying here is, here's someone who's already, through fiction, if this is the case, that is being contaminated, right? Who then turns in someone, her husband, who is contaminated with something along similar lines. And so we're getting into degrees of what's wrong and what's right then, instead of saying that the whole voyeurism thing is wrong. See, everyone's been taught to be a voyeur. That's a term you use for folk who watch other people having doing that. But now it's standard fare for everybody to watch. So how do you differentiate between degrees of standard fare or slight preferential changes? Because that's getting used now across the board now. Their preference is this and their preference is that, right? Then the next group come out and use the same argument, and that's how they get what they want. Because everything becomes muddied. There's no real clear-cut right or wrong anymore. And you can't even get the public ire up about something that should disgust them. My rape. You understand, when you cannot protect children, your culture's finished. That's one of the signposts that's finished. But you can't go on protecting children if you become addicted to variations of similar stuff being shown as entertainment, for goodness sake. This is standard entertainment to pass your time, to pass your years away. Designed by experts. Anyway, as I see, folk will do what they want. I'm not here to say they won't, or that they should be stopped. I'm just saying that for those who want to know what's going on in the world, you don't have to be like the rest. If you want to either regain your sanity or keep your sanity, you have to start looking after it, don't you? Like anything else. That's all. And don't go to pieces when you see the society collapsing around you, as it really is. There's organizations out there now getting pushed by big, massive marketing companies doing great big experiments on the public using the collective psychology and the bonding psychologies and using all types of entertainment mixed in with it to make a lot of money, by the way. And I'll put one up tonight. This one was in Australia, and you'll see the women there wearing hardly anything. And it was all set up by a big marketing strategist, using psychological terminology to explain why they'll adapt to this and they'll fall for it and they'll go for it, basically. And how it's fulfilling a social need, etc., etc. And exploiting anxieties for people who can't interact anymore and they feel that they're left out, basically. That's what they call it, I think, fear of being left out, something like that. Or not participating. But it shows you where it's all going. As society has been broken, a lot of the functions in society have been broken. The functions in the relationships of men and women and all the rest have been broken and still under an incredible attack. And of course, there'll be even fewer children born, and that's part of the strategy and the goal, actually, for those who control the planet. As everybody has fun, nobody's having the children. So FOMO is the term used, fear of missing out. all generated by marketers and psychologists. And the people fall for it and fall right into it. But anyway, I'll get on to some of the topics here because I've been prattling on too long. And it's not, when I prattle too, it's not a matter of complaining so much. It's a matter of just helping those who want to understand what's happening. That's all. If you understand what's happening, you don't have to be part of it. If you understand the whys, you might not fall into a lot of it. And you certainly can protect your mental health by understanding what's really going on. It's a good article to read too, the formal one I'll put up, because it shows you how easily led folk are when they think they're doing something different, but it's all been fabricated from they follow. Always is that way, mind you. Now we have other things happening too. One is, I want to put up some articles tonight about clusters of cancers that are affecting, they show up in youngsters quicker actually. And there's some in the US, there's some in Australia, but clusters. And what's amazed me is to see the playing around the topic of the big corporations and even the local governments. All governments are in bed with corporations because they get lobbied and they get financial money to run for election and so on, all the politicians. So you always get the same thing. But some of these children are obviously being raised in areas where there's highly toxic something in the area. One of them, I think, was to do with heavy pesticides. Another one was to do with wastes from a big corporation that makes your big packing tapes and things, very, very popular. Old corporation. But when you get a whole bunch of children in the same years, when they turn 18 and all get brain tumors, for instance, and something big's going on. And that should be, it's just astonishing that folk have to fight and fight and fight. And it's all through society, from the severe things like this to even the lesser things like trying to find out what a local agency is doing in your area. That's how things are today. Everything's a fight, isn't it, in this corporate socialist system. But I'll put some links up on that. Another one too, it's interesting because I find that some religious people can often have an insight because they meditate about pondering the past and things that have happened to societies that either have disappeared or lived through things that we're living through in the past, ancient past. And even though they say that things don't just repeat themselves, I think as Mark Twain said, but they do tend to rhyme. In other words, the same cons go on too. But you'll find, there's one here, it says the Antichrist will control mankind through gadgets and the internet. As people fall into slavery, smartphones, warns leader of Russian Orthodox Church. And I've seen articles like this before for years. I remember too, there was I think it was Dr. Scott, his name was, used to be on the radio, worldwide radio. And he died a few years ago. But he had good talks on that too, and he was one of the first ones to use internet and computers in a big way to promote his own church, etc. And yeah, he's always screaming for money, like they all do, etc. But he did say that this whole satanic Luciferian system could not be brought into being without the computer. And it's so right too. Because everything that you would have to be, that would predict control would have to be done through constant gathering of information on every single person and monitoring them all throughout their lives in the world. And that's pretty well where we are. We always think of horns and fires and brimstones, and that's why it's poo-pooed, but the fact is the most evil thing can come in under the most pleasant guise. That's how it comes in. Because you never recognize it, that's why. It's an interesting little thing, and I always find these things are always food for thought in many different ways. And also, I like to put this one up too. Five Eyes Intelligence, that's the 5 agencies, the 5 countries, I should say. They're all connected together. They're all really unconnected. I think they're all completely, almost all one corporation now with intelligence agencies. You cannot possibly keep things secret when you can't disbar anybody from any nation coming in and with right qualifications working their way up, becoming a citizen and getting in your intelligence agencies. Every country is obviously infiltrated, and therefore they have to really be one. Of course they are, on a high level. You can't keep folk out. And this one here says that their intelligence chiefs reportedly agreed to limit the Huawei's growth. That's a Chinese company, Huawei, and they're coming down on it. But it seems to be, really, is it just a battle between the big corporations to sell their own systems and have them dominate? It probably has got more to do that than anything. They're trying to say that they've been hacking using the Huawei system, but I don't think there's any system that couldn't be hacked. That's just part of it too, isn't it? So it's really due to with domestic corporations wanting all the power, I suppose. And let's be honest, who cares which country is going to dominate ultimately, because all our countries have our own agencies spying on all of us openly. So what does it matter? I have to look at these articles and shake my head like this one here. Since the turn of the century, there's been a marked increase in the share of students struggling with mental health issues in universities across the country. And although strides have been made in developing effective approaches to support students, they call it well-being. This is Scotland, of course. It says, we know we have to do better. Well, when everything that gave you reason and purpose by tradition has been destroyed, you'll have a problem with young people trying to find what life's all about and what the purpose of life is, because a lot of the purpose has been destroyed. It's like psychiatry. At one point, psychiatry used to think, well, if we just get everybody to be happy, there'll be no mental illness. It's like you just say, here's the happy pill, and now that's it. Now that would be your purpose. Just be happy. There's more to life than this vague thing called happiness. Like it's something you switch on or off. That's fine for the old gadgets, like the old Elgato chips you put in the brain, and through a little button you could press and create different stimuli inside someone's brain, like the Tavistock Institute, for instance. That's what they used there for a while. No, that's not happiness. Here they go again with all their psychology that's supposed to help. And the terminology in this is amazing to me. Everybody today in a socialist system talks like a bureaucrat, with this, or a corporate bureaucrat, I suppose, using the same terminology like well-being and proactive and all this rubbish. Huh? They can't just talk normally, human to human. Huh? So it really is an enhanced safety network and investing in well-being. Can they just be human and talk like humans? Huh? So you read this rubbish here, and the whole thing is the same thing. Proactive this, proactive that, but they can't say what they're going to actually do or even address the problems in the first place. That's the start of anything. Address the problem, acknowledge you got them, and acknowledge what led to this particular problem. That's a good start. It does help. Another thing too is the corruption across the world is from top to bottom in most countries, I'd say. Psychopaths know that. They'll flood in and become the heads of the NGOs and become heads of corporations and heads of politics and government departments where the big money is. That's a psychopath. And they know where the cash is. They know it's corrupt, but they don't mind because they feed awfully well on it. And they keep telling you, in fact, they want to lock you up for saying it's corrupt, naturally. 6 Mexican states are running short on gasoline, prompting frantic rush to the pumps. And why are they so short? You wouldn't believe the stuff that's getting stolen, the gasoline racket. Well-organized crime, obviously. But it's said that they're trying to get more secure transportation methods, but it's because it's all getting stolen. Tanker after tanker after tanker is getting stolen. This is normal there, apparently, they're saying. Has been for a long time. Amazing. What an article. I'll put it up for you too. It says that over $500,000 a year more theft in that area. That's what it was, more than 500,000 than the previous 10 years. So it's $3 billion in stolen fuel per year they're getting. Boy, that takes a lot of cooperation from all different levels of governance, doesn't it? Including your police. Another article that shows you how they keep putting the same mantra. I'm sure it's just shoved out there to get the vaccinations going. Sydney measles alert. A measles alert. Man with deadly disease, right? Caught from a Thai child visits popular bars and so on. Deadly disease? We all used to get that. It was no one screamed and hollered about it. It wasn't deadly. Measles. They used to have measles parties. Somebody had measles at school. The parents would get together, bring the children in, and they hoped they'd all get the measles. A natural measles, not a synthetic virus thing created in the lab, but the natural thing. And you'd have a lifelong immunity to it. So there you go. And I don't think this one was a German measles. It's a different type that was first recognized in Germany. The German type, that's different. That can affect a baby in the womb. But this is just normal measles as far as you can see. So, but they're calling it deadly disease. Quite something, eh? Terrify you. So it's childish propaganda, isn't it? Just be afraid, get the injection, get vaccination. Also, with the Golan Heights at stake, is saying here, John Bolton set Trump straight on US-Syria withdrawal plan. That's quite an article, does some global research. So Bolton said to Trump, his withdrawal from Syria has been put on hold again, naturally. I think it's all rhetoric myself, the whole pulling out in the first place. And Pacific trade deal spurs Canadian farm sales to Japan as the US watches, it says here. It's a pity that the US Canadian farms couldn't sell cheaper meat to the Canadian public so they could actually eat it in the country here. But that's just the way things are going, isn't it? And again, they're trying to get a meat tax on the go too. They're floating the idea to try to get, all these psychopaths are going to politics, and they are psychopaths. But they know where the wind's blowing. They'll jump in. They'll say all the right things, all the quotes, blah blah blah, all these slogans, and they shove their virtue up. And if it was reversed tomorrow, they'd be shouting reversed slogans. I guarantee you, that's what they. I don't have any time for these people, these psychopaths. I really don't. And they don't give a darn about the countries or the damage they're doing. They're in there for all the wrong reasons. Also, it says here that 48,000 Brits are dead after the worst winter in 42 years. That was for the last year, I think it was. And it's not over yet, right? So for this year, it'll probably be worse. They're trying to hide a lot of the numbers now, but the folk are dying in their own homes. They can't afford the fuel taxes and the fuel itself, and don't have the fuel credits, they call it now too, as they get you into the real socialist system of rationing, folks. Don't forget your smart meters eventually to be used to ration electricity to you as well. Folk don't remember much, do they? They've got short-term memory. Now, I hate prattling on so fast about these things, but what I'm saying is you're supposed to take this kind of stuff that I'm dishing out here as being all normal. Look around you and tell me how many times you're asked your opinion on anything that really matters by any agency that's got power. It never happens. Every agency out there is designed to stop you altering anything. They don't want your input on anything at all. Not at all. Even every agency, including government agencies now, have their public relations department and complaints department, and they're trained there to say, oh, oh my good, that's terrible, I will look into that. I just had experience of that for a whole week, phoning every day to one of them to do with my mail. But that's their job, you see. And each time you talk, you have to add another ticket, they call it, for a different problem, because I've had 2 problems since the last one. I've never had to complain to them before about anything until this winter. Because now, with this recent go-slow rotating strike they've had in the post office, and you couldn't even get the facts on that. Initially, I thought it was just parcels, but apparently it was letters too. And I'm posting off bills, and then finding out I've got late fees on them, and they're taking over a month to get through these checks. Now, when your government agencies, these are agencies, when they go down the tubes, a lot of other things are going down the tubes at the same time, obviously. That was a mark of a first world country, was efficiency for essential services. And you couldn't even get out of them when you phoned them up what the strike entailed. It was like sullen, angry, whatever. And then the talk was just parcels. Now you find out was letters too. So anybody out there who sent me letters and I haven't received them yet, maybe they'll turn up. Who knows? Because that's where it starts to go to, isn't it? When things become later and later, you're saying, well, we'll ever get them. You don't know anymore. You just don't know. And they won't tell you. Because government agencies now, they're not going to tell you anything. Someone apparently also, I was told by one supervisor, because I was given a notification of something received, to be picked up in the main post office in Sudbury in town. And try to get an answer. They couldn't find it on the computer. They had the number for the whole thing, or whoever it was. It wasn't in the place it was supposed to be. And then eventually I got a supervisor after about the fifth call, every day, that is every day of the week, who said it was for my keys, for my box. I said I didn't order any keys for the box. And I was getting charged for them. Didn't you complain? I said, no, I didn't complain about anything like that. And as you've got problems with your key, I've got no problems with my box at all, Well, somebody put it in, and then the next day, it's like getting gaslighted for when their system's kind of screwed up. The woman said, but you got a call from us telling us what was going to happen about your keys and that. I said, no, I didn't. He said, no one called you to tell you we're going to get the key. I says, no. Well, they had it on their records that somebody called me. Well, who did they call? Are they trying to say that someone's impersonating me or something? Because I never ordered this. You see what I'm saying? Everything becomes a big mystery. And then when I phoned up yesterday, it was, oh, it's been resolved. I said, what happened? They won't tell you. Is everything classified here? So what is this? You see what I'm saying? Is it just a matter of too many chiefs, you see? Or what? But definitely, you'll find that there's nothing out there to serve the public anymore. And that's what comes across loud and clear. Sad that, isn't it? That's what happens when you're going down the tubes. That's what it is. And you're told you're free, you have lots of sex, and now you can get drugs dished out by and sold to you by the government, with shareholders that are ex-police chiefs and all the rest of it. And you wonder why the youngsters need mental health treatment. Well, sorry for letting off the steam, but it's not really letting off steam, as I say. It's just explaining what modern life is about. And hopefully, and I get through to a lot of young people to stop bashing their heads against the wall. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 20th of January 2019. Last night, because of global warming, it hit, when I left to go to bed, that is about 2 in the morning, it was about minus 24 Fahrenheit, which is about minus 32 maybe on the centigrade scale. That's without a wind. And it's been like that for quite a few nights in a row, in fact. And it's been one of the coldest winters, really. When you take a record of it for yourself, don't listen to what the stats that are constantly churning out there, but keep your own records of them. It's quite amazing to see how cold and how long the winters are now compared to what they were not so long ago. And yet, as you're living through all this, you're told constantly, and it'll come about February or March, they'll tell us it was the warmest winter probably on record. That's what they generally do. And I've given talks about this before. By keeping my own records and comparing them, what they predict is going to be for today or tomorrow, whatever, and what I notice is they never change their predictions. And if they claim there's going to be a few inches of snow, you'll find it might be a foot or a foot and a half, and things like that. But they don't readjust it in the records to say that actually happened. They stick to their old predictions. So predictions are more important than the consequent facts. Everything today is so incredibly politicized, isn't it? The average person doesn't know that. That's the stunning part about it, really. But everything is so politicized. There's hardly anything you read or hear on electronic media of any kind that isn't incredibly politicized. And everything's out there with some agenda in view. Everything's agenda driven today. And I've mentioned it before, how we live in an age of personality cults. Folk don't even realize that even on your mainstream television, the main anchor people that are made to be popular, like personalities, they're really a corporation. Everybody's a corporation these days. Politicians hire the marketers to give them a personality image to project it to the public, and I can have a fake image of how wonderful they are, and etc. And it's all fiction. Everything's about appearance to the public, perception management, they call it. And we are in an incredible time today when everything is like that. Everything. The stories they put out today are often put out by marketing companies using the memes of today and the themes of today and the politicized agendas of the day. But the main motive is really to get publicity. Everybody this week's been prattling on about the latest Gillette toxic ads or whatever. Men are toxic and masculinity is toxic and all that stuff. And it turns out the one who really put it forward is a person who's actually advertised on behalf of Gillette and advertising themselves. So when you think of the free publicity they've got with everybody prattling on about it for pro and con, etc. And again, it ties right in with what Adam Curtis talked about with the media is meant to get you angry and emotionally upset. So because the more upset you get, the more people will click away on the internet and their chat rooms and their Twitters and all the rest of it. But what a free publicity that is, isn't it? For a company that probably would not, maybe have never thought about Gillette before, for instance. Never mind ask the question, what on earth is Gillette doing? A big corporation that's out to make an incredible amount of money. What's it doing in that area in the first place? Well, it's a great free publicity thing. If the big agenda right now was marriage, they'd be battering about marriage. No, wow, marriage, pro or con. Again, it doesn't make any difference as long as that was the theme of today and everybody gets upset about it. You see? And it's the same too with the personalities we're given as figureheads in charge, apparently in charge of countries. I've gave out the articles before where politicians in UK, and it's the same I'm sure in the US and Canada and elsewhere, actually have acting lessons given to them. They attend acting lessons on how to appear to the public and deportment, how to stand and posture for all their photo ops, etc. Because nothing in the system they're living in today, it's all visual, etc. It's not real anymore. Maybe it hasn't been real for an awful long time. You find too that a company like Gillette, that's there for mass profit, right? With quite an amazing history. I remember a long time ago, many years ago, an article in a paper, I think you maybe read it on the British side, and it was a big award given to a man who'd taken over Gillette at that time, an ex-military fella, as a CEO or owner, I'm not quite sure which, but he turned it into the massive powerhouse it is today for profits. And it said in the newspaper that how they did it was to vastly cheapen the life of each blade so that people would buy more, and at the same time market it in such a way that folk would think it was wonderful and buy more of them, and lo and behold it actually worked. That's what it said at the time in the newspapers. And I thought about it too, because you see, at one time people had open razors that would last their lifetime. You sharpened it on a strop, and you'll see it in old movies and so on. And then came in the closed razor, safety razor as they called it. And you had one blade initially that, again, would last quite some time. It's a bit thicker, a bit high carbon steel, and it would give you a lot of shaves. Then everybody caught on the act that would make them thinner and softer steel so they wouldn't last as long. They'd be dull, and you'd buy more of them. But again, then you can make the people buy an actual blade holder. In fact, the rest of the whole thing, more often too. That was part of the gimmick as well, for a point. And then this is, no, let's just make a fancy looking holder and then give them a 5-blade pack and make the price awfully expensive. And that's how they did it. The same techniques basically as light bulbs. And I've talked about that too, because there's an awfully good documentary put out years ago on built-in and planned obsolescence, where the companies that used to make light bulbs made them last for many, many years. Each bulb would last forever, almost ever. And of course, if you're making a product and you've got a company to make them, you would get to a stage, you'd think, where everybody got enough light bulbs, and unless you broke them by mistake, they would last forever. So you're out of business. So a company, the companies that made these bulbs met in Germany. They went from Britain and the US, everywhere else, over to Germany for this big meeting. And all the makers of these light bulbs decided to sign an agreement, come to an agreement where they'd limit the life to a certain amount of time. And even then, it was much longer than the last today. And over the years, they would agree again to shorten them even more and more and more, until, of course, towards the end, you find that you put the thing in, it lasts a few days sometimes, and just pops as soon as you switch on the light. And that's how you do it. Same with laser blades and everything else by different companies. They're all pretty well in the same con game. And then you have the double blade razors and all the other gimmicks, etc. Whereas if you had a decent high carbon steel, thicker blade, it would last you an awful long time. And there you go. But everything today is profit driven, big profit. At one time, you used to have a lot of families, actually real families, who had the controlling interests in the shares of their companies. And therefore, the head, the people who became the CEOs, were of the family lineage. And they used to have a kind of responsibility to the family name. And they knew their workers, too, a lot of their workers, and they looked after them, made sure they're okay if they were sick and so on. And they made sure the pensions were okay and that kind of thing. That was awfully good for a long time. The way that it worked with a lot of companies, not them all, naturally. And then along came the corporate raiders, as they called it. And the corporate raiders found backdoors into companies to buy up excess shares, and then get the controlling interests, kick out the family members off the board if possible, and then they started selling off the assets. All the things that functioned to make the companies what they were was sold off and stripped and made lean, they said, so they can resell. The whole point was to resell them. And a lot of them just went under as soon as they stripped them of their assets. And so a pure, incredible, agreed type of personified, in fact, agreed personified, really, system. As he ditched everybody and got rid of older folk with the skills and training, etc., and sold off the assets until companies were folding all over the place eventually. But that was get rich quick. And since then, really, we've been in this era of the me generation, as they call it, and winners and losers. Everyone's taught to be a winner. And as you lose old moralities that kept cultures intact, and we're constantly losing the moralities of the old systems. And of course, the old system wasn't perfect either, by the way. There was a lot of horror involved in the old system, indeed. But what I'm saying is that there were values in amongst the people themselves that kept things just tolerable. And you brought in the human aspect of it, where you couldn't just boot people around for money's sake. Well, we've pretty well lost that today. Back in the 70s, I think it was, there was a book, maybe in the 70s or 80s, called The Corporate Man. And it was about the era where they started to really, really push the corporations as big, massive empires unto themselves. And you were part of a team, the teamwork. And of course, the neurologists and scientists and psychologists were on board with all this stuff to make sure, with all their different tests, that if they brought someone on board, would they be the right person before they hired them? And they're pretty good at predicting who would go along with anything at all that the company did, even all the things that perhaps they shouldn't go along with. And they would swear unyielding alliance to these companies, no matter what happens. And we never really got rid of that eventually. And now that whole kind of culture is spread into all of society. Milton Friedman too came out with his greed is good, being taught through all business colleges and universities. And such a culture, of course, is, as I say, is winners and losers. And with the internet, with the chat rooms and Facebook and Twitter and all the rest of it, everybody's a narcissist out there. It's all about me, as they say. It's all about me. And again, Curtis mentioned that too on some of his documentaries, where all the information has been gathered about you to reflect back to you, right? To advertise to you and suggest to you. It's all about you, which boosts the whole idea of narcissism. Oh, I'm so important. Really? But you've never seen such incredible arrogance on a personal level as we have today. We're losing our natural humaneness. And that's all through companies and corporations. I've even found out this last little while, there's no point in complaining to a corporation about anything, whereas a government agency or anything else. Actually, private ones are a bit better to deal with. They'll try and get things fixed. Whereas government agencies are like civil service bureaus where they can't really fire them. And if you complain about something, it doesn't matter what the problem is or who you happen to be, you're a figure, a number, a non-entity, and you're dealt with as such. It's a there, dear, nothing's going to happen really. Or if anything happens, it'll be the wrong thing. Or they haven't listened. It's like going to the doctors today. They don't want to know your family history. We are an idiocracy, honestly, where they look at pictures, and the doctors look at pictures, and they'll even look on their... I had an experience where one of them showed me something on a smartphone. I don't even have a smartphone. I don't need to. And which is pointing out about the spine, which I could write a book on the spine, and I'm not kidding you. And I thought, why would you even point to this picture on a cell phone? Just like idiocracy. When in my mind, I could just take it from my mind and draw it for you, perfectly. But that's what everything is today. And if you try to mention any kind of family history, which has always been so important, they don't listen to you. It doesn't matter. Everything today is flowcharts. And so if you go to a doctor or something with a problem, here's a problem, it goes to the next, then little arrow points, the next flowchart, the next flowchart, next flowchart. But if you don't understand the family history side of things, which suggests that lineages, or you've got a DNA or a chromosomal problem perhaps in the family lineage, or something that you're all prone to, then they'll definitely misdiagnose you. That happens all the time today. Well, it's the same thing complaining, as I say, to different agencies, especially with governmental agencies, where they tend to pad a hierarchy, constantly growing all the time, with people who work at the bottom, who work their way up, and come off the shop floor, you might say, to speak that is, and put them upstairs, and you end up with too many of them. And no one is going to risk their neck by maybe getting involved in any complaint or problem or whatever. Their job simply is to pacify callers with a there attitude and try and alleviate something. And often the alleviation would be a lot worse than the initial problem. And I'm not kidding about that. So that's where we are today. Everybody is a personality. Everybody's got their allegiance to whatever they work at, especially when there's big money involved. And the average person doesn't make the kind of money that the agencies, for instance, that are related to government do make, naturally. Therefore, since the whole point in the winners and losers society is to get up amongst the winners, then once they get up there, as I say, they aren't really going to serve the public as such. They're not going to do it the same way, no way. And they don't want their names mentioned in case anything goes wrong and any particular thing and a complaint comes in about themselves. You see, that's how scared everybody is of losing their status, which goes along with the level of their paycheck. But we're living in that age now, and it's not a matter of bemoaning it to an extent. It's a matter of factuality. We go through massive transformations of society down through time. And it doesn't mean that you're actually going into perhaps a better one, although the different sociologists and there's even anthropologists involved now too. They even work with the military all the time. When they're going to invade countries, they go in with the troops because they know the ways or the Achilles heels of different cultures and how to infiltrate, destroy, and even threaten or torture them. This is the society we're in today, isn't it? Where it's all professionals, but the professionals are not there to really help you. They see you as numbers and figures and animals, actual animals to be manipulated. They do this and we do that, and then they'll do this and they, them. That's the public. And the biggest and most well-paid psychologists and neuroscientists, etc., and behaviorists all work for big top agencies in marketing, which also are related to governments and work with governments when required for big money in order to prompt us and persuade us to go along certain paths. They also work, and have done for a long time, with teachers' associations for education. They create the toolkits on how to persuade the children collectively to come to the same conclusions as a teacher wants them to have on any particular topic, and how to even annul any individual responses from any actual individual child. It's all pretty well perfected, using peer pressure, even shunning techniques, and things like that to make them conform. It's just astonishing. And that's through all of education today. And then the same techniques are now used on the public, overwhelmingly so. And what you're seeing, the politicization, as I say, of everything out there in order to control, to make you conform. It's nothing to do with idealism. Don't ever fall and say, well, they're really idealists, so there's an excuse. No, they're not. The ones at the very top of this, who design all of this, their ideals are not your ideals. They want you to all conform and be controlled. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. In a society that was free, you would have individual opinions, individual everything out there, and people wouldn't not be at each other's throats because they were different than you. So when they're forcing you to go along with everything, until you can't even have your own opinion, or you'll be punished sometimes in a more shunning type of way, or else to the next step, which is coming, where they'll go for your income or your job and get you out of work. That happens too, by the way, today. And all the way to violence. And then that will come, because the system today, run by those at the very, very top, use all the unstable people below them to do the violent things to other people, which also frightens those people who will not conform to the latest PC, whatever it happens to be. And that's where we are with all of this. I listened to a little clip by Christopher Hitchens' brother, Peter Hitchens, and he had done a talk show with someone from Australia, and he was talking about the past and how he's lambasted at times about his criticism today. Peter Hitchens, is that they're saying about him that he's bewailing the loss of a past, but he's not. He's bewailing the loss of some of the values, individual values, that kept society going, even amongst the toughest times, where folk would try and help each other out. Just basic decency values, which are vanishing. That's really what he stood up for in the past, and why things are not necessarily on a great course for the future, never mind the present. But he did mention that he came out of university in his day. I think he went to Oxford, and he came out like many of his peer group at that time as Trotskyists, as Marxists, and revolutionaries. They were all getting trained in university. That's what universities, never stopping to think, wait a minute here, this is the big Ivy League type of university, the real granite stone building type things, opposed to the red brick, as they poo-pooed the working class type universities are getting built at that time, maybe in the 1940s or 50s. And why would your establishment have brought in revolutionary Marxists and communists into the country and given them teaching positions in the areas where those in the elite who rule Britain? Maggie Thatcher talked about it when she was giving big grants to the top private schools, the posh schools as they're called, and then universities. She says, because that's where our future leaders come from, and they all meet each other there, and they'll all know each other as they grow up in politics and business and CEOs, you see. Why would the country be allowing that to, not just allowing it, but encouraging it to happen? They're not dumb. There was never a country more spied upon, ever, and monitored than the UK. A country that ran an empire didn't just sit back and let things happen. Even though they were rapidly losing the empire with the massive debt they incurred from borrowing from the US banks during World War I, which you could never pay off. And then World War II rolled along too. But they still had that same control system embedded in the universities. But they allowed all this to happen. So there's Peter Hitchens and his brother, of course, who became a radical, far left, pretty well communist, working for the nation. And it wasn't until Peter Hitchens saw what was happening in the Soviet Union towards the end of it. He was there when it fell, or supposedly fell. It didn't fall, actually. It was just transformed. And if those who remember at the time, Gorbachev gave a speech, and I think Eric Margolis, if I remember, who was a good reporter, he covered that speech and wrote it down and put it in newspapers. And Gorbachev at that time said that you'll hear shortly that communism is dead. He's talking to the nation, the Soviet nation. And he says, don't believe it. He says we're simply transforming into the next branch, international. If you're wondering why the West, especially the US perhaps, is financing and leading the charge for a form of socialism, but it's a corporate socialism with corporations at the top running the systems below. Very much, by the way, very much like China, isn't it? Because China knows they can give you everything you want in China. Everything you want. And Hitchens said the same thing. And they are, by goodness, you wouldn't believe what they can buy and what they can do in the cities in China, where the money is. And the prices are even facelifts and things like that and are so cheap. And the youngsters all going for plastic surgery, things like that. But what you cannot have is freedom of thought. You must conform with ideas and opinions according to the party norm. Well, it really isn't much different. If you stop thinking in terms like communism, capitalism, and corporatism and so on, it's all the same, folks. I've said before, you can have the same brass bands playing the same national tunes and marches as long as you want, but you've got to remember, you can change incrementally, quite a long distance, even face the other way in one generation quite easily, and done so slickly that folk don't even recognize it. But when you see the same signs and symptoms of a system across the world, then you better believe it is the same system. We're still battling the same nonsense today of, they're right-wing and they're left-wing and they're liberal and all that nonsense. It's the same agenda, just like Jefferson said. When you see the same agenda continuing between changes of the House, meaning parties of politics and government, they're continuing the same agendas, then know you're under tyranny. The trick is to make you appear like they're different, but they're not different at all. The same agendas in the UK would have happened, actually have happened. Look at Cameron, for instance, supposedly conservative. What a joke that was. He was more liberal than anybody. Tony Blair was more conservative, was warmongering, and the big corporate giveaways, which rewarded him awfully well, by the way, for his wars. Don't you think? Have you seen lately all the houses and real estate he's collected throughout England? And abroad probably too, a bit. But you don't get that with just being a little prime minister, a public servant. Yeah. He was picked up by JP Morgan and elevated to the head of the group to do, I think they called it the quartet, they call them, I think, the quartet, to do with managing corporations across the Middle East. So, as I say, nothing really is what it seems to be unless you want to look at it. Remember, most people, and it's not their fault, haven't got a clue what's going on. They're too busy having fun. And if you interject and say, well, would you like to know why this is this way, or whatever it happens to be, they'll call it it's a downer. They don't want you to be reminded of these nasty, unpleasant things. Like debt, for instance. Don't talk about debt. Don't talk about, for instance, a Great Depression that happened before. For some reason, it could never happen now, they say. Because they can't tell you why it could never happen now. They really do think they're living in a kind of a type of free society. Where special, invisible people above them are managing it all perfectly on their behalf, like bureaus and bureaus and bureaus of saviors who just live in little offices and sky buildings or something, taking care of everything in their lives for them because they love them. That's as far as it goes. That's as far as it goes. It's astonishing, really, how little thought goes into asking questions. At least I find that. But I've always found that, I suppose. And I did analyse it even when I was young. I thought, well, the conditions in Britain were so bad for most of my life. They got a little bit better about the late 80s, I think, is that the governments allowed more money to be printed up, and they allowed the credit cards to be thrown out across the board to everybody for the first time. At one time, you couldn't get those things unless you had collateral to back any kind of loan, including credit cards. And that's how they got a lot of the country through such incredibly hard times as the deindustrialization went on and on and on for years, without telling the public even why. That it was agreements they signed with the EU to completely deindustrialize the UK. Everything's secret, isn't it? We're dealing with agencies and government bureaus and so on. It's always secret. They can't tell you anything. And they won't tell you anything. But people are told that they're there to represent them. For who? Who's representing you for what? They're there to represent you for what? So we go along with this game of pretense, and we have to participate in the pretense. And you're supposed to vote so that someone can rule you. And again, a marketing company will create the image of this person or this party you're going to vote for. And we've been doing that for long before I was born, that same nonsense. It's really amazing to me that people just don't ask the right questions. How many folk do you know who've even asked why your countries are always at war somewhere across the planet? Why? And don't take the glib answer, oh well, it's to stop some genocide over here or there or whatever. Really? Is that what it's, we're just out there to do good for people and stop them killing each other? Is that what it's really about? You'll find our countries are behind most of the killing across the world and the plundering still today of the resources of different countries. Way more than any little petty tyrant is doing. The first thing you need for war, and that includes localized war, without even the term war being used, because we don't use that very often, is we're policing actions. Just change the appearance of something, perception management again, to disarm your logical process of thinking. And you find, as I say, that, Tony Blair is a good example, only one of many. The Daily Mail had it 2 years ago, years after that invasion of Iraq and elsewhere, where Tony met with the heads, the CEOs of big oil corporations, and the US ones too, and they divvied up the oil fields across Iraq before they did the invasion. But what was the guff that they gave to the public for the necessity for invading Iraq? Well, suddenly Saddam Hussein, the guy who'd served the West all that time, was a bad man. He was the world's demon, for goodness sake. And that's how you do it. George Orwell's 1984. Who are we at war today with? Who's the enemy today? Is they change their gun sights all the time back and forth until you're lost. But behind it all is always profit for big corporations. Always. Always, always, always. The whole idea with Russia for years now is because there's a group in the Middle East involved with a group in the US and in Britain who want to have the rights of the oil fields all through the Middle East and into the east of Europe. And naturally Russia is also, was also laying oil pipelines across. In fact, they were feeding a lot of the gas to the Europe, of course, and that all got cancelled supposedly because of the last fracas of propaganda. So it's always to do with corporate warfare, really. That's what it's about. Nothing to do with ideology. Russia's got the same successful psychopaths as we do, running us, behind the scenes. Governments are almost there to rubber stamp things on behalf of the big corporations today. And the big corporations use every technique of control. Again, persuade the public. The first thing you must do for warfare is basically get the public support on your side for anything you want to do. If you want to invade and steal whatever, don't say we're going to steal, we're going to help these folk over yonder. That's what you say. It's not difficult to do. And because you raise a public to be gullible, believing that they've got an honest society, even though there's no signs of it, they keep telling you there is. And so why would they lie to you? Decent folk would say, well, there must be something to it, for goodness sake. And the fallout from it all achieves further goals. And that's what people don't realize too. The mass migration, remember, into the whole of Europe was discussed before Tony Blair got the war going with Britain involved in Iraq. That was part of the agenda, the mass migration into Britain and other countries. So there are many agendas being fulfilled here, and it's not by chance. Not by chance at all. In other words, what I'm saying to you, I've given talks on this many years ago about how history is written. And it's nothing sudden in history, unless it's something out of nature that was unforeseen. But anything to do with human involvement means there's been planning involvement. It doesn't simply happen by itself. There's never a spontaneous war on any grand scale. It takes years of planning to get it all going and to get all the logistics worked out, etc., before you make the first move. Big battle plans. But for the public, you're taught today that everything's just fairly sudden. I turn on. Your history books are written in advance. And that's why the initial propaganda, no matter how absurd it is at the time, and even more absurd after the facts and after time has passed, with more evidence coming to light, the initial propaganda will be stuck to like concrete. And everybody involved at the top, as they stand together and they close ranks, will never ever vary their opinions. They all know what to say and do to keep on their own little power jobs and to stay up in a position of wealth. And that's how precise and total everything is today. History must be taught afterwards the way it was planned to be taught before the event took place. Same with World War I and a whole lot of other wars as well, for that matter. It's so fascinating to see how the group, the Milner group that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations across the planet, for the global enterprise system based in London, England at the time. It's so interesting to read The Anglo-American Establishment by Professor Quigley, who was given access to their own historical records. They have their own historical records, for goodness sake. They also have members who write the history for the public, and that's different. But for accuracy's sake, for their own members, they have archives of the real histories as it happened, going way back. And Quigley thought it was so important that their function in history and altering and planning history and planning the future was so important that the world should know about it. And in Tragedy and Hope, he went too far. The group that he belonged to kind of panicked, and they took the place back for the book for printing and didn't print more, although luckily enough had been printed that they could be copied. And they are accurate when you compare them. But the other book, The Anglo-American Establishment, giving you the history of this group and how they didn't actually start in the 1800s, but they changed their name in the 1800s. And in fact, it was so secretive, they changed their names even amongst the degrees of membership from the low to the top. And he shows you how they worked with circles and how some of the circles would interlap like Chinese puzzle rings. And when they interlapped, those members there, we would call technocrats today. They worked to do more of the doing and persuading other groups on how to go along with the doing of things across this empire that they were creating. And they also planned wars with South Africa to take over South Africa from the Dutch and settlers and the Boers. And they planned an attack on the Boers. And members of this group attacked the Boers, and they took along with them a Times reporter, because they own newspaper. The members owned the newspapers in the day too, as they still do today. And the reporter's job was to give a fake account of this raid on the Boers and have it as the Boers attacking British settlements. And that would give the propaganda and justification for Britain then, enforcement to an extent, to then send troops in there. And then the troops would police the areas, fight the Boers, and we had the Boer War out of it. And then a handful of people in London, they really ran the empire and the resources of it all, would then grab the diamond and gold fields of South Africa, the diamonds and gold. That's how it was done. And Quigley goes through it and a lot of the members involved in the Anglo-American establishment. It's quite fascinating to read it. When you realize what he's telling you, and in his position too, what he's not telling you, he could even go further than that. But he did say that for the last 100 years or so, they'd pretty well been instrumental in steering the course of history. Well, it hasn't stopped. Hasn't stopped. And depending on how you look upon this agenda, if you're an insider, naturally, you're going to get rewarded for going along with it all. And you do. Doors will open if you are tapped to go into the CFR. You can't go and apply for it. You're tapped. They've already sussed you out to see if you get your mouth shut, how trustworthy you are, how much influence you can have in your little circle, and then they bring you up and put you into different positions. So they're all through the civil service of governments as well, and the military too at the top. And for the military, they don't often have to even serve much time in the field, if any at all. They're just rammed up through the ranks very quickly. And once they're up to top ranks, they know all the contacts of military industrial boys, and then they're given jobs as CEOs sometimes, or go-betweens to lobby on behalf of the military industrial complex. It's quite a system, but it's a completely different reality than what the peasants are taught at the bottom, that pay for everything and fight for everything and do the fighting. It's vastly different. Vastly, vastly different. So perception management is incredibly important in the way that we are run. Now, I've always mentioned in my talks, I hope I have, that I don't give you nostalgia for the past. But there's no doubt about it. The natural humanity you would see from people, even in times of incredible poverty. And the UK was incredibly poor after World War II. And they were incredibly rationed right up until 1954, I think. And even then, lots of the food was still getting taken out of British farms and sent abroad to feed Europe. That was a devastating war. Devastating. So, but during it all, you still find decency amongst different people, but you'd also find a form of viciousness amongst those who'd had maybe a few generations of poverty. Because to survive, people can become awfully hard as well, naturally. But it was the balancing out of it with decency there too that got people through it. And I remember when people didn't own their own homes. I mean, most folk, say in Scotland, rented council housing. They couldn't afford their own homes. A socialist country, as far as socialism, as far as I was concerned, was the suppression of people not to be able to afford and to buy anything. You're kept at bottom level with wages controls, prices controls, high taxation. And that's how it was set almost in stone that way. It was terrible. And amongst it all, you had ridiculous public relations exercises or propaganda run again by psychologists and marketing companies on how wonderful the youth were today. They had all this chance in the pop business and rock business and so on. And we should all be happy because you had good music. Well, it was to give you them a fake idea for the change of the future, because they weren't raking in the millions of bucks like two or three different top groups. Of course they weren't. They were lucky to get jobs, a lot of them, at that time. As I say, so anyway, Peter Hitchens, he did mention that he's not nostalgic for all of the things of the past, but he did mention they had basic values. And there was a basic remnant of a culture that came from what is hated. And that was at least Christian values, how you treat each other. That came into good effect to get folk through the hard times. And neighbours would often, I remember it, help each other out to pay the rents. Very frequently. That was quite normal. You didn't have the mass commercialization of purchasing, buying, because most folk bought everything second-hand that I knew. And it was the same across a lot of places in England too, a lot of big cities, etc. People were just broke, and somehow they survived and ticked along, basically. And the so-called empire thing, that was for Hollywood to play that up, the wonderful empire they had, because the general public didn't profit from it at all. They paid for it all through their taxes, because to be armed and policed by soldiers and all the rest of it. But that's what it was. Nothing really changes, just the perception of how it's managed today, and the constant reiteration that you're free. And you've never been so free, as you're the most surveyed and surveilled society in history. It's incredible, eh? Anyway, I didn't even mean to go there today. I was just going to prattle this off and a whole bunch of articles, but it gets me that most folk won't ask questions. The youth are always catered to much more than the adults do. Because the youth, and I really mean this, with anthropology and psychology and the milestones in life and psychodynamics, all the rest of the stuff working on us all the time. They know exactly, through the culture industry, how to cater to you. For the young folk, it's sex and hedonism and narcissism. And just fill their heads full of it. Get lots of this party, fun, sex. For the people who do get hitched, which are declining all the time naturally, with all the anti-marriage propaganda coming out there too, except for maybe single parents. The state has become the supplier of goods and finances to single parents, and has done for an awful long time. And none of this happened because of pressure from the bottom, folks. It came from the top. Always comes from the top. It suits the banking system, the international banking system, the big system that really runs the world through its networking and its circles and circles, like Quigley said. Awfully important to understand it. Because the same group that the Milner Group belonged to, that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, Pacific Rim Associations, and all the other associates, all the same group, gave you the United Nations, the World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, and a host of other debt-creating systems, but profits for the banks, you'll pay off. They own them all in the central banking systems across the world. Because money was to be the new military power, the new form of military to control everybody's lives. And it's been awfully successful, isn't it, when you think about it to the present time. Because when you're getting some of it, even though it's all debt-based money, people can live a bit better on a materialistic basis than they've ever done before. But again, they've been taught that somehow, like, this candle will never burn down, although it's designed to. Because once the whole world's under the same system, in comes austerity. And just like they're teaching children today, in school now, to worship the planet Earth, and they must sacrifice for the planet Earth, which is another big front organization for total control of the planet and how you live, right down to even if you'll get born, if they'll need you, eugenics, etc. Because that's all part of the same system run by the same group. Always was. And they've got all the time in the world to implement it. They're awfully precise now with their 50-year plans and 100-year plans and what they can achieve, the different goals along that way, all the milestones. They know exactly what they can do now. And you will see all these things come to pass. And the brave new world of Aldous Huxley, that didn't appear out of thin air. Huxley mixed with all the eugenicists. He mixed with the class that were the controllers and the professionals that dealt as controllers on behalf of those who owned the planet and the finances of the day. And he was well aware through many, many discussions and growing up at the dinner table, etc., that through psychology and training in behaviorism and repetition, you could train up and raise a public to believe and behave in any way that you want them to behave and believe. And that's exactly what they've proven over and over again. Most people don't have their own mind. They have no reason to question things if they're just basically materialistically happy and they're getting along in life with, as I say, the substitutes for everything else given to them. But from the beginning, I never came out to talk to the general public. I just knew there was enough people out there asking questions who didn't have the answers. A lot of people, you'll find, were punishing themselves. They couldn't fit in. They knew lots of things were wrong in the world. They didn't know how to get verification of it and the knowledge of it and what was going on. And maybe a lot of them, some of them were brighter than other people, perhaps. And if you don't get the answers and you're demanding questions, you might turn in towards yourself and destroy yourself through either alcohol or drugs or both. And I'm glad that down through the years people have got in touch with me to say that I helped them get off of that track. It's very hard to explain to someone where this thirst comes from, this thirst to know. The most important thing in life is why? Why? Has never been asked. Or you're given ersatz answers. You're getting fake answers from the establishment who crush any alternative facts. I'm not talking about reasons, I'm talking about facts. And that's important to know as well. Again, if you into Lord Bertrand Russell, another Lord, remember, and folk never question why the Lords would be working to create this thing called socialism, because they don't have any affinity for the general public, the common people. Just like George Bernard Shaw didn't. But he had the same attitude as Shaw, and he worked in the same organizations as Shaw. The general public would have to come, everybody individually, to the socialist organizations run on behalf of the elite who should rule you. And you'd have to justify why they should allow you to stay alive and live in a socialistic system. George Bernard Shaw said it. His voice is up on video up there, on audio, if you want to listen to it. That hasn't changed. And Russell also said that eventually, hopefully he said, anyone will be able to persuade anyone else of anything they want. He's talking about with the right techniques and power behind them. Well, guess what, folks? Look around you today. What's getting pushed? Huh? And everyone fighting everybody else. Because you fall for opinions, you immediately take sides around and say, wait a minute, who's giving us this? Why are they giving us this? What is the final agenda with this? It's too easy by using emotion to get them fighting rather than asking. Isn't it? Remember too, before I finish off this talk, that you can get the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And you can also donate to me. You can find out how to do it if you go into the website. And once in a while you have to ask yourself, what are you rebelling against? Who wants you to rebel? And now we have this sanitized version of it, where every country will issue you permits for your little demonstrations, and you go and protest, whatever it is, hold hands and sing whatever it is you sing, and then you all go off and have your pizza and coffees like you've done. It's almost like a hobby now in some big cities across the world. It really is, isn't it? It's a nice hygienic safety valve for everybody. Because everyone now has been pushed into different groups that you must belong to. You must belong to something, or you're not complete, apparently. But again, with a lot of folk now, it's only socializing they get. They can't even talk to each other, even when they're standing next to each other, without texting. Anyway, I'm going to put up some articles tonight. I was going to prattle on about them actually, but I just wandered off as I always do. And one of them was about the libraries and how the libraries are churning out. From the 90s in Canada and elsewhere, you would see massive book dumps and garbage dumps of awfully good books. They call it weeding, by the way. And like all organizations today, they're international. No one in any country, in any particular job, profession or in, does it according to that country or that culture. They all connect, see what else has been done across the world. Oh, they're doing this, let's do it too. But your culture, your history is often getting trashed. And along with it, the weeding, as they call it, and it's taught, they call it weeding. Every top librarian knows it too. And some of the salaries of these librarians in the US bowls you over. Really. Honestly. Wherever you get taxpayers' money at work, you're getting plundered, folks. That's where the money is these days, isn't it? But yeah, the books are getting chucked in rubbish dumps and the whole bit. And there's a lot of politicization involved, naturally, of things that they simply want to disappear. Tragic. New Zealand's doing it, Australia does it, Canada's done a lot of it already, still doing it. And the US is just doing it at an awful rate right now. Quietly from the public. They don't want public knowing about it, because you might start getting complaints about it. I mean, this is public money. It bought all these books, remember? And a lot of them aren't even selling them off. They want them all ditched. There's a lot of stuff now must disappear from history. The memory hole, as George Orwell called it. So I'll put those links up for those who maybe are curious to find out, to wonder where all the old books in the library, and a lot of reference books too, simply went to, is to give you new histories all the time. Everything's remade again. So I'm sorry to prattle on tonight, but as I say, I didn't mean to go here in the first place. But once you get started, sometimes it just happens. And
when I see you in the morning, will you still want to be true? I can't dream.